It's a slim report of barely 25 pages, but it has been authored by the UK's well-known defence think tank RUSI and has ruffled feathers in India by making startling claims. According to the RUSI report, some companies in India are helping Russia bypass Western sanctions by supplying Western manufactured spare parts for Russia's weaponry deployed in Ukraine. But weapons imports and exports are entirely in the hands of the government of India. So how is this possible? Is RUSI claiming that New Delhi is turning a blind eye to such exports despite Western sanctions on Russia? Or is this part of a Western attempt to discredit India due to its refusal to suspend oil and other trade with Russia? Since the report, by default, implicates the government of India itself, there are some red faces in official circles in London who are now downplaying the report. But RUSI co-author Nick Reynolds has defended its controversial claims about India in an emailed response. India's top defence analysts Amit Koshish and Rahul Bedi spoke to me on each charge made in the report. Listen in. Quote, "There are myriad companies based around the world, including in India, who will take considerable risks to meet Russian supply requirements," unquote.
It's highly unlikely, if not virtually impossible, for the Indian companies or India per se to be involved in this kind of transfer. I think for two reasons. One, that a lot of these components, the report also talks about it. I think that some of these are hit by the export embargo and arms trade control and all that. In which case, India, between India and US and other, there is this end user certificate, agreement arrangement. Some kind of arrangement is there. We have signed all the foundational agreements, all of which actually aim at preventing this kind of illegal, transfer of arms. So there is very little, if any, possibility of any product which is hit by arms trade embargo to be passed on by India or any Indian entity to Russia.
That's a grossly incorrect statement, because any kind of military commerce or military sales overseas, particularly, or any exports of military items are very strictly monitored by the Indian government. And there's very little scope for any private industry. In any case, India's private arms industry is very, very small and very limited. So any question of them operating independently and exporting any equipment to Russia is, to my mind, is probably non-existent. So I think this is a blatantly untrue and incorrect statement. And I think the Indians, no Indian company would be willing to take such a risk. I think India is fairly cautious in its dealings with something like sanctions. And I think the Indian establishment is very conservative and would not run the risk of any kind of sanctions busting activity, because the ramifications and the penalties for such activity are quite high. So I think India would, given its stand and given its posture over the last couple of months to the whole Russian-Ukraine affair, I think India would be a little loath to go down even the dual-use route to help out the Russians.
Quote, "Restricting access, therefore, likely means preventing export to countries such as India of goods that are, in some instances, used for civilian purposes," unquote.
Going by what has happened in the last 2 months, 2.5 months, US and other countries have found it extremely difficult to impose sanctions, per se, directly on India. There is some sort of discomfort even in EU countries and the US, because these are the kind of things which you can't controvert. The fact remains that it's not as if the European countries and the US have completely forsaken their engagement with Russia. So if you can't do something directly, then the ground has to be laid for maybe some kind of indirect sanction, if I may use that term, or embargo on transfer of items which are legitimately required by India, whether for civilian use or military use is a different thing. So, in the absence of any verifiable, credible evidence that India has consciously engaged in activity which is illegal, it'll be, in my view, highly questionable for anyone to advocate action should be taken against India or any Indian entity.
It's very difficult to say, but it could be a possibility that they are trying to leverage this to get India to condemn the Russian aggression. And I think India is treading a very fine line as far as its foreign policy and security policy is concerned. It's possible that because of India's close relationship with Russia, particularly in the military field, because about 60 to 70% of Indian defense equipment is of Russian or Soviet origin. So therefore, India would probably willy-nilly be associated in the Russian camp. So it could stem from guilt by association, but I don't think it's guilt by, I would imagine that it would not be guilt by action, because I think India would adopt probably a very cautious stand. So again, I'll state that whilst it's technically doable, I think India would err on the side of caution and would probably not do this, and hence any kind of sanctions on India, I think for the moment is a little unfair.
Quote, although Russian weapons are full of Western manufactured components, it is not clear that the companies manufacturing them knew that the Russian military was the end user. Unquote.
Well, I think it's too laughable for anyone to say that the company is so naive as to export components to India or any other country for that matter, not knowing where these are going to go, is sort of questioning your own system, which is highly sort of stringent, and there are checks and balances in place. The companies, defense companies in particular, are not so naive. I mean, they can't be merely selling components which can be used for the kind of purpose which they claim they are being used without even knowing where they are going to go. There is simply no way the governments would not know who is exporting what to which country. The only exception to this would be items which are not held by the export control regimes. I mean, there it is possible for some companies to sell, but again, the point is that if there is any doubt, all this is legitimate commerce, and therefore there is a record of what has been sold by which company to which company, and even to my knowledge, in a large number of cases, even this trade is subject to some kind of oversight as to how why this is needed, where it is going to be used, and so on. And if there is any doubt, the exporter can certainly make inquiries. So without making any inquiries, to make this kind of allegation is to my mind very, very unfair.
The underlying bottom line for the arms bazaar is profit. So I think there's a lot of disingenuity in what a lot of these companies are claiming. They are private entities. They are driven by their shareholders. They are driven by profit. But they're also monitored by their respective governments. So I think as far as the sale of these items is concerned to Russia, it would probably be circumscribed now under the sanctions regime. But I think if any company is claiming that it did not know that these systems were being used in Russian weapon systems, I think is being a little disingenuous and being economical with the truth.
Analyst Rahul Bedi also has some questions for the authors of the RUSI report.
A lot of the components that are mentioned in this report, I mean, do they actually have proof of whether these systems have been supplied? I mean, there is a requirement for these systems, yes, but have they actually been supplied by whoever makes them or whoever produces them? Number one. Number two, I don't know how RUSI is able to get hold of these. If they know that these components are being supplied, why don't they confront the governments that or the countries that are providing them and out them in a sense, expose them.
And here's an excerpt of what Nick Reynolds, co-author of the RUSI report, had to say in response. Quote, yes, we have proof of companies involved in supplying electronics components to the Russian arms industry. We are not in a position to share this because it is difficult to untangle which firms were active collaborators, which were unwittingly manipulated, and which were front companies. It would be inappropriate to name them, especially as investigations are ongoing. The countries through which the components are laundered by Russia are expansive, but Czechia, Serbia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, India, and China were all notable examples. In terms of why we did not expose countries, the report clearly does expose them. Unquote. But such exposure without proof is not cutting much ice, with defense analyst Amit Koshish.
That based on what I know of this report, there is no credible evidence that has been presented. It's only conjecture. This report is intended to maybe create some kind of pressure on India, or maybe put India into force India into some kind of corner, and coming as it did on the occasion of Boris Johnson's visit to India. I think there is something more to it than meets the eye.
Padma Rao Sundarji for Times Online.